Cheterian. I'm the Executive Director of the Gomidas Institute. We're an independent academic organization. We are best known for the books that we've published over the years, about 170 titles. But we also do other kinds of academic projects. So today we're here for the release of Defeat documenting the Karabakh War. This is originally came out in Armenian, and Karolis Gulbenkian Foundation asked us to translate and publish it in English. I was very pleased to do so. I know Vigen for many years. I think very highly of his work, and he's the main author of this work. Although he's worked in collaboration with 4 other people in Armenia with their respective contributions to the volume. But it's essentially Vigen's work. The event is going to be mainly English, but also some Armenian, because we have the Armenian contributors in Yerevan. They will join us online, so that we can. So we're very lucky to have them. So this is the first time that we're all together, and this will allow us to examine the work and its content. The section. So Vigen is going to do the main presentation, and then we will turn into question and answer session. We have some interesting members in the audience, as well as people in Armenia, and I hope that we have a good discussion afterwards. Vigen?
Hosting us. Good evening, everyone. So I'm very pleased to be here and for the release of our book, Defeat, which is here, the English translation. What I will try to do is give some background of why this book, why this research. 2020 war, the Second Karabakh War, was a huge shock for many Armenians, and it was the biggest failure of Armenia since its independence. Well, up to the Second Karabakh War, in Armenia they said that the Armenian world is composed of 3 pillars, 3 segments: the Republic of Armenia, the Republic of Mountainous Karabakh, and the diaspora. As a result of the Second Karabakh War and the events that followed, the blockade, the final assault by Azerbaijan in 2023, one of the 3 Armenian pillars does not exist anymore. It was also a shock because many Armenians, I don't know how it was for foreign experts looking from a distance, but for many Armenians, the majority I would say, they were shocked because they didn't expect 3 things. One was the way Russia behaved, that Russia would tolerate such military developments. The second is the way Turkey behaved, that Turkey would play a direct military role in a Karabakh war, and Russia would tolerate that. A third shock for the Armenian public is the fact that the Armenian army did not manage to do its work, its function, to defend Mountainous Karabakh and its people. And probably the fourth element would be the way the Azerbaijani army performed. So I think all these elements were kind of surprises for many, I would say the majority of the Armenian public opinion. The 2020 war was a series of failures. The first failure is in the military field. Eventually, a war is the confrontation between at least 2 armed forces, and in this confrontation, the Armenian army did not manage to stop the Azerbaijani aggression, and it lost territory and it lost its organizational capabilities. So the military side is very important because it's not possible to understand the war without looking at the military dimension. It was also a political failure because, at least for me, it was evident that the Karabakh issue was the biggest challenge the Republic of Armenia had since independence. And the number one responsibility of any Armenian leader was to make sure that no second Karabakh war would happen. Because politically, Armenia had achieved what it wanted in this conflict, which is the safety and security of Karabakh Armenians. So from then on, Armenian side did not need a second war. And any Armenian leader, number one task, he had, was to make sure that there won't be a second Karabakh war. By skills, by diplomacy, by negotiations, by whatever means. And I would say that from the four leaders, all four leaders failed, because they failed to find a solution to the Karabakh conflict. But I would also say that from the four leaders that Armenia had up to now, only one was conscious that this is a major issue and he should do everything to find a solution to it. Afterwards, we had leaders which believed that time was on the Armenian side, and a fourth leader who thought that he could manage the conflict on his own terms. So it was a military failure, it was also a political failure, and most of all, it was an intellectual failure. I think Armenian political thinking did not manage to understand the changes that produced the shock I described initially, that Russia would behave the way it behaved, that Turkey will intervene, that Armenian army was not ready, and the Azerbaijani army was ready. And this is basically, this intellectual failure, I would say, is the result that Armenian political thinking for a number of years did not manage to separate between propaganda that you do for a cause, for a very good cause, whatever it is, but propaganda it is, and political analysis. And very often these two categories were completely mixed, and one was sacrificed, which is the analytical side. After the war, I mean, this war revealed, it's a very rich material for researchers, but it should also be very important material for politicians, especially the Armenian ones, to study the failure that happened and why it happened. And unfortunately, instead of doing this exercise, saying that, okay, there's a defeat, and this defeat should gives us opportunity to learn and to correct. What happened was polarization, infighting, and accusations of treachery, which instead of helping us to analyze, served as an instrument of censorship. So for the moment, I would say that based on the initial shock that the Armenian public had, the trauma is still there, because no one gave an explanation what happened, why it happened, why this outcome, and what comes next. So if in the past it was the nationalist ideology that was subjugating the exercise of analyzing the reality, today it's the official discourse of peace, of a new age, of connectivity, which is serving as another ideology, again, avoiding the task of analyzing and understanding what is happening in Armenia and in its environment. And instead we have this very naive discourse about peace and about a new age of cooperation and so on. Now, immediately immediately after the war, I very, very clearly remember there was a call by colleagues in Yerevan, colleagues who are university professors, who said that we need to come together to understand what happened because we have difficulties understanding what happened. And I remember there were 2 Zoom discussions. You remember it was COVID period back then. And after these 2 Zoom discussions, the desire to ask questions kind of died down, but probably it diverted to different channels and spaces. From my side, I continued having this kind of discussions first with Razmik Manusyan from Vigen Foundation, and with this collaboration led to the idea that we need to do an in-depth research, especially because the Armenian government eventually decided to create a parliamentary commission to study the conflict and the war. And this parliamentary commission evidently is politicized. It's not up to the standards of commissions of inquiry that happens after big failures. Probably in this country you have similar commissions that the government sets up. I myself have worked in 2 UN commissions of inquiry, one looking at the Gaza war of 2014, and the second one I worked 6 months in the Syria Commission, work on the second report. So usually you set up an independent commission with an independent personality, with experts, with technocrats who don't have any political interest in the subject matter. And in Armenia we didn't have this. We had a parliamentary commission, and even the results of their work is not public up to now. Garen and Ashot, you correct me if something happened between and I'm not informed.
You're right.
I'm right, okay. So when we saw this happening, we said, okay, at least from our side as experts, we should do our work and do academic work. Okay, we are not a government sponsored body. We don't have the same means, we don't have the same number of workers, we cannot demand from military to come and answer our questions, but with our humble means, we wanted to do this research because we thought it's important. And thanks to a team of researchers in Yerevan, here we have Garen, we have Hai, we have Ashod, we were a team of people there. We started this work, but parallelly, I was also involved in another initiative. Lawrence Bowers is here in the hall, and he's part of that, which is called Armenia-Azerbaijan Scholars Initiative, because we wanted also to do this work, academic work, researching the history of the conflict, not just as academics coming from one side of the conflict, but to open it up to all sides, including colleagues from Azerbaijan, colleagues from Armenia, colleagues working in European universities, and up to now we have organized 3 workshops, and the 4th one will be this November in Geneva. And there too, we were asking similar questions about the conflict, its history, why it happened, and kind of looking at different sources to understand this. So all these efforts together led to the publication of a first book, which is this one, the 44-Day War, published by Ivy Torres, which has 16 chapters, and just after I sent this manuscript, with this group we were discussing, and we were conscious that something is missing. Because although the 16 chapters analyze the war from different perspectives, there was something very important missing, which I was trying to get and eventually failed to get, which is the military history of the conflict, the military history of the 44-Day War. And what I wanted initially was to have this description, the military history from the Armenian side, but also I had identified one Azerbaijani colleague who was specializing in military history, and he was initially ready to do a similar work from the Azerbaijani side. Now, eventually I didn't get neither nor. The Azerbaijani colleague stopped talking to me, not because of pressure coming from Ilham Aliyev, because he was a dissident and he lived in Moscow, but once the Ukrainian, Russian forces invaded Ukraine, the full-fledged invasion of 2022, the Azerbaijani colleagues stopped talking to me, as well as other Russian colleagues. I think there it was clear, those staying in Moscow, they understood that they could not continue talking and collaborating with colleagues living in Western Europe. So the Azerbaijani story is that. And from the Armenian side, I had 2 draft chapters, and after sending them my remarks, they did not want to continue working on it. I understand it's very difficult work. It's very difficult work to describe defeat. Emotionally, it's not easy. But I think it's very important. It's very important to do our profession, to do our work. I'm a researcher, I know how to do this. And eventually, we agreed that we want to work on a second project, which eventually ended up being this volume. And this volume starts by a chapter written by Garen, who is here, where he collected a series of questions that we needed to answer to understand what happened during the war. So Garen prepared those questions and eventually became a chapter in this book. And based on these questions, I did interviews in Yerevan, mainly in Yerevan, with political leaders, military leaders, soldiers who participated in the war. Among one of my sources is Hai Hovhannisyan, who is present here, who's also our one of our authors. He's the one who prepared the map. But Hai was also a soldier during the war in an artillery unit, and talking with 31 people from different perspectives gave me enough material and confidence that I could write a chapter describing what happened during the war. Maybe I should mention, before passing to our colleagues in Yerevan, is that for me it was important that I don't write my book about the Second Karabakh War. For me it was very important that this is a collective project. It's a collective responsibility. I say responsibility because I felt it was a responsibility. I was first time in Karabakh in April '92. I was a young journalist. I went there. I avoided being killed twice during 1 week when I was there. And since this trip, I wrote a lot about Karabakh as a journalist, later as an analyst, as an author. I did my PhD comparing the conflicts in the Caucasus. So I had a position, I had a voice about this conflict, and with this voice I felt towards what was happening. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention is that both of these books were first published in Armenian in Yerevan, which is also important. I tried this book to have a Turkish translation. With 2 publishers up to now, with no success. I should go on and try to have it in Turkish. And the third thing I want to mention is that although now in Yerevan we have this feeling that politically it's better not to talk about these events, that we should be somewhere else now, that the war belongs to the past and so on. But I think it is very important that we talk about the war, that we understand the history of this conflict, because if we don't do that, if we don't have this historical memory, then we will be saying many wrong things, and we will be doing lots of mistakes. For example, today it's very fashionable in Yerevan to talk about Armenia's sovereignty. That Armenia maybe lost Karabakh, but now is more sovereign. But who remembers the debates in February, March 1988? Why Armenia wanted to be sovereign? Why didn't Armenia want to stay within the Soviet Union? And back then, the debate about sovereignty was that we need to have our sovereignty, we need to have our own state, exactly because we need a state to defend our people. And our people back then were the Armenians in Azerbaijan, because the Soviet state failed in its function to defend Armenian citizens of the Soviet Union living in Soviet Azerbaijan. So following the pogroms in Sumgait and Girovabad in February 1988, the debate, the political debate in Armenia shifted towards sovereignty. And today, to contrast sovereignty with the defense of the people, for me it sounds like absurd. I stop here. Maybe my colleagues in Yerevan have things to add. Thank you very much for your attention.
First of all, thank you for the presentation, Vigen. I worked on this book myself because I translated it. And thank you for the colleagues. Some sort of background information. I don't know how you got to meet them in Armenia in the first place. They are also specialists in their own rights. They're journalists, but they were PhDs. You mentioned Ashot's contribution as the editor. I thought the chronology, the chronology in the book is very, very useful to try and make sense of the developments during the war. The obvious question to ask is what impact has this book already had in Armenia since it's already been released there, and Armenia is presumably the primary target, right, in terms of getting a new debate around these core issues. Okay, so it'd be good to know what kind of impact it's already had in Armenia. You didn't really discuss the diaspora, whether the diaspora in Armenia is part of this greater Armenian reality, or the failure of diaspora as much as the failure of Armenians in Armenia and Karabakh itself. And of course, then we can talk about perhaps what's changed, especially on the military front. And it sounds bizarre to me that the military establishment in Armenia could miscalculate the changes in military technology, the use of drones. How could they come to such a miscalculation? And has that changed? Are you aware of changes, structural changes within Armenia, so that they're better informed of where Armenia stands militarily today vis-a-vis its adversaries?
Maybe the military correct tomorrow, so we will see some development out there.
Okay.
Maybe Karen and Ashok or I answer.
Yes, content.
Este la fundem haine doar de așa că se nu față de mai o preciziune. Deci este o fundem se do mai dică, do profită, la persoana și montanas. Dar la
Maybe there should be some translation.
I can't tell us when I don't do that. Okay, we need a translation.
Okay, let me translate, yes.
I'll hear from...
Ashok Janizit, Takone Matlere.
Oricum mai bine dică, oricum mai oricum să nu vorbim concret, să establish că funcționează, dar că primeți dică, că vele și o să academia e dreptă, în porțiunea indispensabile, reprezintă americană, o veli este scumpat de loc, La revoluțiuni ca zi, ca trend, următoare, în ce categorie?
I should say, the first book was written in academic style, and we tried to have the second book written in a different style so that it's more accessible for a broader public.
Dacă apancerul meu roșețin, Vigen Cheterian complex, vorna gina linii mici provocativ, provocativ, acțiunea problemă, stat atunci încălzite, nici cu soare, adică catastrofei indactuiți.
And we decided to have a very provocative title, Defeat, so that we don't kind of try to avoid from what happened and to face the results of this conflict.
Establish target work and people over the interpretation of Cheterian, this is about design on Rizero. Here, Bayada Project, the systematic levels that is a successful interpretation.
And the little book really got much interest, and it was sold quite quickly. And one gets the impression that people were interested in its material.
We
didn't think that it will be, a bestseller, but we were convinced that there will be some circles that are interested in learning what happened, and they will be engaging in the book.
Țara Sfântii a invitat Italia în conservă de Kiev, și a venit imagini stigme pesimiste,
but unfortunately, time passed since the book was published in Armenia, and the development since is not encouraging. It's more kind of pessimistic.
Ինչպես բարեն արտեղասել գավը ռազմական շրջորդ, որտեղ պատրաստվում են ծուսատորն ինչ-որ տեխնիկա, չգիտեմ թե ինչ տեխնիկա, և հետարությունս այն է, որ այդ համեմատությունը թե ինչ է ողել, և ինչ կան այսօր, և ինչ է դրվաղ, մենք կարծես թե չենք հատված։
Tomorrow there will be a military parade in Yerevan, and they will show new weapon systems that Armenia bought. And like this, there's kind of avoidance to ask the question what happened in the past and what we should be doing now and so on. So kind of the new weapon systems will be kind of covering in that discussion. I shouldn't yes.
Ține Iezuiul și răcătănuțiunile, vorbiți și răcătănuțiunile, poate ce răcătănuțean sau răcătănuțiunile scetiste.
We were hoping that there will be a continuity, that this would be a first step of research, but the desire to continue this work, I don't see it existing.
Եվ ճիշտ է, Հայաստանում է որ հիմա ընդհանրապես ամբողջ աշխարհն է այդպիսին, որ այս փոստվիճակում կարծես թե ռացիոնալ գույքը շատ դժվար է ներխոսնում, բայց հիմա իսկապես ամենադժվարը ռացիոնալ դիսկուսիա կառավարելն է։
I understand that we are in postmodern period and rational discussion is not very much in fashion, but that's what we need. We need rationality. That's all. So I got you?
So, again, this thing that came out as a principal contributor to the book. The research that conducted by the village to this 2020 war was unique in a sense that no clinical research was conducted here. There is another one solid military clinic in what happened in 2020. Nagorno-Karabakh book published by American Colony and not of the 7 seconds mark. But this is the only Armenian work conducted by Vigen, conducted by our team, in part that went in Karabakh War and the defeat and the effort never to understand how it failed. And as Vigen correctly mentioned, it was not only a military defeat, it was also a political defeat, and for the political dimension of the defeat, there are numerous papers and research went out there, including the book that you just mentioned, including some others. And I would spread that this was failure of political, failure of strategic. You were mentioning in the beginning of your speech 4 factors that Armenia failed to calculate how the way Turkey behaved, the way the Azerbaijani army performed, all these would have been if there were on prudence, the Armenian leadership. So because Russia is not thinking it thinks that mid of 1990s its ultimate goal to deploy keepers in the region. And Russia's position was also presenting up to the revolutionary government in 2019. It's called Lavrov plan, but that was rejected by the Armenian government. The plan that had been rejected earlier by the Marxian government, the way Turkey did, again, was also mission with several branches, because there were like separating several treaty countries, and the first of the several treaty resulted with the right events we know that preceded the 2020 war. And Turkey's larger involvement in regional affairs like in Libya, in the Mediterranean, in Syria, and Iraq, it was a precursor to what would happen in Armenia as well, what would happen in the conflicts regarding Turkey's involvement. And the way the Azerbaijani army performed, that was also the Armenian leadership not to reflect, not in favor of the revolutionary government, but also the favor of special council, because the 2016 nuclear war was sort of a rehearsal of the Azerbaijani army's superiority over Armenian army, and Norway was withdrawn, unfortunately. So there are so many dimensions out there, and yes, this was a very good collective effort. Let's think of that, prepared several documents to respect the purpose of this field, and but unfortunately, is reluctant to explore the conflict and to grow most of the armed that are currently privately domestic rivalry, especially during the pre-election period. So this is what we have.
Very quickly before come to your questions, the impact on diaspora. I think after the war there is more and more polarization, not more, and in the diaspora, I don't know. I think people also suffer from the fact that they don't have an explanation, an interpretation about what happened. And concerning the military, whether there's changes in the military, I think the Armenian government, especially after 2023, made huge efforts to procure military hardware. And as it was mentioned, probably we will see some of them exhibited in Yerevan tomorrow. But whether there is a serious reform within the military structure based on the failures that we saw during the 44-day war, I'm not very sure about that.
But do the Armenian armed forces have strategic studies sections within the armed forces where isn't it their job to ask those hard questions? I mean, do you know people within the military whose job it is to be at the cutting edge of serious analysis? Do you know such people?
I know such people, yeah. Well, in this book, one of the chapters is written by an army officer, and he's explaining why modernization, Western-style modernization failed. Of course, during the research for our book, I have done many interviews with high-level military from the Armenian army, and I think that the intellectual level is an issue.
Can we ask open the floor? Any questions from the audience?
Just two pieces of information. Yerbupan. Arachina, first one is that, do you know someone called Leonid Nersessian?
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah.
He also contributed to one of
He
the
spoke here
chapters.
2 years ago about the same subject, and it was very enlightening. And from what I remember, we actually videotaped it, it's on our YouTube channel, so I'm not plugging it, but watch it. I think he mentioned the fact that it wasn't the case that we didn't have the military arms, but it's more a failure of maybe training and commitment and also other things. You have the second part was obviously since then there's been a lot of, he couldn't say too much, but obviously he was saying there was an effort going on for another Armen available Badrasli. But the second point I wanted to make was that, I forgot his name now, the gentleman who's head of the diaspora committee, diaspora government in Armenia and diaspora in Armenia, the minister.
Sinan.
He was here as well, sorry about this, probably. He was here as well visiting, and we asked him directly what happened, and he did say, like, a lot, but he did reveal one thing, which is that recruitment of people to the military academy and was abject in failure. I mean, even to this day, so it's very difficult to encourage young people to go into the armed service, especially to the higher ones, the actual military school, because as you know, it's about what things you value. You value your businessmen and your soldiers and your leaders, and so that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, absolutely. Leonid Nersessian is one of the leading military analysts, and he lives between Yerevan and Birmingham, I guess. I think he's doing his PhD. I don't know whether he's finished or not, at the University of Birmingham. Yeah? Yes, please.
In the decade or so before 2020, was there anyone in Armenia who was pointing out the dangers of failing to prepare for what Azerbaijan was planning? It was fairly clear that there was a build-up towards them retaking the territory. Did anyone in Armenia warn about this in practical terms and come up with practical military preparations that they felt should have been made?
Yes, there were very few, but there were some very influential people. For example, you can find, again on YouTube, interviews given by Sanbel Babayan, who was the former commander of the Karabakh Defense Forces during the First War, who was basically saying that Azerbaijan is getting ready, and then the next war will not be like the previous war. It will be much more violent, with much more firepower, and that he was saying that the Armenian army was not ready. The problem was that Samuel Babayan was considered to be an oppositionist. He had falling out with the elite in power, that is Vigen Cheterian and later Serge Sarkisian. So basically what he was saying was not very much paid attention to. But probably he's one of the most serious voices, especially with his background as a former commander of the Karabakh army. He was absolutely saying all that.
And were there practical suggestions of, it's one thing to diagnose what the problems might be, it's another to come up with solutions and things they should have prepared specifically on a military level, or was there were no suggestions like that on a practical level?
Well, I remember, and maybe Garin corrects me if I do any mistakes. I remember an interview he gave in 2013 where he was describing how the balance of power was changing, how the next war will happen, and it will be much more violent. It will be, with heavy bombing, heavy artillery usage, and so on. And then in this interview, he says that he wrote asymmetric solutions for the Armenian side, and he sent it, I think, to Serge Sarkisian, but he didn't reveal to the public, his solutions to what Azerbaijan was obviously trying to do, which was building up its army for the coming war. That's good.
And then the young man here.
If I may, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this event and for informing us about the background of the book, of the study. It's a bit of a related question. I understand you have focused on why preparations were failed military and how Armenia could be prepared better in military terms. But I'm also curious whether, as part of this specific study with your colleagues, you also looked into some maybe different political reasons, because you also met political leaders. So basically what happened in between 2018, after the new government, and then 2020, and was it very obvious to the Armenian government that military escalation or confrontation is the only way? Or have they, do you think, considered enough opportunities for political settlement? So this is, I'm just curious if you had the chance to study that aspect as well, and if so, what has been suggested by the book? Thank you.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, not in this book.
Okay.
This book, the aim is to talk about the military part. But in this book, which looks very slim and so on, but 16 chapters, so there are lots of articles about diplomacy, failure of diplomacy, about discourse analysis of leaders, what are they saying, how the discourse is changing. There's a chapter about the peace movement in Azerbaijan and its shortcomings. There are lots of political analysis. Political discourse analysis, sociological studies. I would say that it was not the Armenian side which was looking for a military kind of solution to the war, and especially not Pashinyan. I think Pashinyan and his administration, when they came to power, they felt that they are very strong because they have popular support. And they had overthrown this corrupt elite which was ruling Armenia for 20 years. Something like this might happen also in Azerbaijan. So they felt very empowered because of the revolution, and the mistakes they did was not because they were looking for a war, but they thought that Azerbaijan was not strong enough politically to go to a war against a revolutionary government. And I think this is their big mistake. And this is also the result of their lack of knowledge, because most of revolutions that happened in a number of post-Soviet countries. They kind of reawakened the ethno-territorial conflict which was there before. Think about Ukraine, think about Kyrgyzstan, think about what else? Georgia, absolutely. So there are a number of examples, and if our revolutionary leadership had more sensitivity towards history and comparative politics, they would have been more careful.
So is Azerbaijan going to stop with Artsakh, or will they try and invade the rest of Armenia later on? Are they satisfied, basically? So
Azerbaijan already invaded parts of Armenia in September, especially September 2022, right? And of course your question is very, very legitimate. Last year, in the beginning especially, many people were very worried that after Azerbaijan hosting the COP summit and after winter season will be over, that there might be new escalations, especially towards southern Armenia. Now it seems that a number of international configurations have put the danger of any conflict away, that there's a certain discourse about peace, about connectivity and so on, but at the same time, from the Azerbaijani side, we still hear some talks, some narratives about Western Azerbaijan being exactly modern Armenia, about Western Zangezur, about Yerevan being an old Azerbaijani city. So all kinds of discourses that shows that coming from political leaders, it's not like secondary or third level individuals, shows that the discourse that prepares for conflict is not completely away. The options are still there. Lawrence?
First of all, I want to thank all of the co-authors for this important book. It seems to me that this book continues the conversation, the debate, the animus that was driving Simon Salajan's list of questions that need to be asked, and also the white paper that was put together by Robert Ida-William and his colleagues. So thank you. I have two questions. First question to each of you, I think. What surprised you most in your research that you did for this book? And the second question, this is not the first defeat in Armenian history. In fact, defeat has been a recurring event going back as far as the Battle of Avarair in the 5th century. So it raises the question of where does this defeat stand vis-a-vis the kind of typical narrative treatment or symbolic treatment of defeat in Armenian historical narratives? And is there a tradition of not learning from defeats? Where does this defeat fit in to that longer historical pattern, given that defeat has been a recurring event? Or is it actually more that victory was so exceptional in the 1990s that was not assimilated? Knowledge, a structured knowledge about that war and how it was won, and what the actual factors were that determined an Armenian victory were not well learned, leading to strategic errors and oversight and defeat now.
Okay, complex questions. Let me try. What surprised me is the fact that most of the leaders, military and mainly political, were very defensive. Maybe it's normal, but maybe I was also waiting that they would take some distance and be more critical and analytical, which was lacking. And their naivete, sometimes I couldn't believe that they could be so naive. And I tried to imagine how these leaders, especially top leaders who were like defense ministers and so on, who for years they were running the army. I tried to imagine, and they knew that, it wasn't like a conflict that was gone and then suddenly it started. Nearly every day they were firing on the front line. So I was trying to imagine how they thought the next war was going to be. And usually they say that generals get ready to fight the past war. They were not even ready for the past war. They were ready for an imaginary war that fitted their agenda, which was, didn't exist in reality, neither in the past, nor in the present, nor in the future. And that's why when I said that it was a military failure, it was political failure, it was especially intellectual failure, is that this incredible conviction that the war is going to happen like this, and since we won the last war, and anyway, the balance of power was in favor of Azerbaijan in the past war. So we are also going to fight the next war, even if Azerbaijan is buying missiles and drones and satellites and whatever. So this kind of an imagination of things to happen, which could, it was completely fiction. I was really very, very much struck by that. Now, what to do with defeat? I don't think comparing with Avaray is very helpful. The only thing that might be helpful a bit was to look at 1918, 1920, because Armenians are a very old nation, but Armenia as a state is very new, and Armenia doesn't have lots of examples where two regular armies are fighting each other. We have the First Karabakh War, we have the Second Karabakh War. Where do you look for historical comparisons? I have difficulties. Going back and looking at certain battles against the Ottoman army and then the Kemalist army or against the Azerbaijani Republic, is that helpful? I don't know. But if you want to compare, probably that's the only place. But then the lessons are so useless because all that historical development stopped with Sovietization. So what can Armenia learn from that comparison? I'm not so sure, but interesting question.
Really just following on from this question, I'm struck by the title of the book that you, the most recent book, and it seems to me, wearing my hat as a psychologist, that you're pointing to sort of issues around the need for mourning to actually work through some of what's happened, so that we can think more clearly about ways forward. So I think that's one thing, but I think the sort of history is actually really important, and the sort of issues around defeat and the Armenian genocide, in terms of how that has impacted on and shaped Armenian identity, is important. And my question, in the light of that, is why is the notion of defeat in the present case, why is that surprising? Because going back to the history, it's as if we could say that's the sort of norm, rather than the sort of aberration.
I don't think so, because Armenia and the big problem was the opposite, was that after the First Karabakh War, when Armenia won, there was this hubris and this arrogance, which did not help Armenia face the reality, face changes in alliances, changes in the nature of war, changes in the balance of power between Armenia and Azerbaijan. So I think it was not this sense of vulnerability which was driving Armenian policies, but overconfidence.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the other problem is that, and that's why for me this book is very, very important. As I said, I worked during the First Karabakh War as a journalist, so I've been a number of times in the battlefields, and I saw what was happening and so on. So I followed very, very closely. And then the narrative of why Armenia won that existed in Armenia, but also Azerbaijan, a very different story. But for me, both narratives had nothing to do with reality. And for me, the big problem was that no one recorded the First Karabakh War, and as a result, we had all kinds of romantic poems and songs and this kind of romantic narratives of heroes and villains and so on, and no one knew the reality. And for me, this overconfidence was out of place because the Armenian side was not far from defeat, at least in one occasion, which was the summer of 1992, when there was change of power in Azerbaijan, and the new leader, Abulfaz Elchibey, we organized the forces and launched an attack, and Karabakh lost 40% of its territories. They were not far from losing everything. So this overconfidence for me was out of place, but at the same time, and it is also in this book that I asked to military leaders whether in Armenian military academies, do they study the first Karabakh War, the Battle of Shushi, and so on and so on. And they say, they study Second World War. I mean, it's you laugh, but it's you can also cry, right? Yeah, no, it's.
So actually, that does lead on to my question, which is about to what extent can you have sympathy with the Armenian army? To what extent was it a failure within the army? To what extent was it a failure within the secret services? Because Turkey was, the Turkish drone industry was really rising over a number of years, and it was becoming clear that they were one of the top manufacturers around the world. But then beyond that, we've had Western powers, long established militaries that have come unstuck with the drone attacks that happened in the Red Sea, obviously in Woods as well. I can have some sympathy because it's a complete paradigm shift. But yeah, it just feels like it was a comprehensive failure by multiple institutions. So not just on the military front, on the hot side of things, the pointy end, but in terms of the preparation for not just the build-up of material, but the changes of the paradigm. Like I said, they're studying World War II.
Yeah. So just to answer to your comment, Armenia didn't have secret services. It had only internal secret services, basically to harass dissidents. But it didn't have foreign intelligence. And they were relying on Russia. And Russia was not interested. Russia didn't inform Armenia. In fact, the messages coming from Russia before the war was, don't provoke Azerbaijan more. So this is just a week, 10 days, 2 weeks before the war started. So Russia was advising Armenian leaders to stay calm, like not to mobilize, so that Azerbaijan is not provoked. That was their message. So when you don't have foreign intelligence and you are in a war situation, it already tells you something about the fact that this is an incomplete state, right? This is a state that imagines itself to be half colony, right? That's one thing. And the other thing is that Armenian leaders, it's not only them, but also within my profession, within academia, we have boxes. And Armenian leaders thought that they are in the box of post-Soviet republics, and they are not in the box of the Middle East. Although Armenian history is mainly Middle East and not Russia, Eastern Europe, and so on. But in academia, we have put Armenian history in the box of Eastern Europe, Russia, Soviet, post-Soviet. And we forgot that, Erbil is closer to Yerevan than Moscow is. So, and I think most analysts including politicians, including military strategists in Armenia. They thought that, no, this is the region where Russia organizes things. So at the end of the day, the Russians will come and say, okay, now we arrange it in a different way. And that's what they were expecting.
It's difficult for me to appreciate that living here and with the sensitivities and dependencies that we have here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering because most of the time the West and the Russian countries, the Western countries and the Russian countries, were saying that Arba legally is in Azerbaijan. What are you talking about? So I think Armenia didn't take that message seriously. And during the war, they kept on saying that Armenia is not, Arba is not part of cannot be part of Armenia because legally it is in Azerbaijan. What are you talking about? And I have a feeling, I may be wrong, but I have a feeling that all the Armenian leaders after the independence of Armenia sort of did a cover-up of people's emotions because people's emotions were with Karabakh joining Armenia. They knew there is a conflict between the Western powers mentality and the Russian mentality, yet they knew the emotional undertones of their people. So in a way, they either deceive themselves or they deceive the local population. They kept as if everything is fine, you're under control. It wasn't under control. Eventually one day it was going to erupt, I think, and they were not prepared for it. And when the war started, I remember I was following it, and Pashinyan said to people, "We are strong, go and fight, take your whatever you have, we will win," and until then people supported the war and they did everything to help. But I think it was kind of a deceit, I think. This is my opinion.
Of course, legally, the idea that we should preserve territorial integrity of states is very, very important. And the idea behind it is that we keep stability in international order. And of course, international order is decided by a club of nations, so nations support nations.
There's no justice in there.
But it's I mean, in the big book of international law, which is bigger than the 2 volumes that Felix wrote about Armenian Church, I mean, international law is not just one article, right? I mean, there are other laws as well. And in the case of Karabakh conflict, of course, the international system was in favor of Azerbaijan. But at the same time, international organizations recognize that there are also other laws. There's the law that people have the right to decide for themselves, and especially self-determination, especially when the state that we want to preserve, right? When the state turns against a population, then this population has the right for its own survival to secede and to declare its independence. So the international community, when it was paying attention to this conflict, and international law was trying to find a balance between these 2 principles. And of course, since Armenia and Azerbaijan became independent, by breaking exactly that rule, the rule that Soviet Union's territorial integrity should be preserved, because we reached a point where politically this couldn't be sustained. But also there's other cases, like in the last years we have the case of Kosovo, we have South Sudan, we have Eritrea. So we can also imagine, it's the exception, it's not the rule, that some new states might take shape and get recognized by the family of nations that they are independent. Now, the problem was that Azerbaijan was not satisfied, and Azerbaijan was not satisfied because of 2 reasons. One is that Karabakh was autonomous region, part of Soviet Azerbaijan. So this was one issue. But the second was that during the First Karabakh War, Armenian forces occupied, in total or partially, 7 Azerbaijani provinces. And the population of these provinces became refugees, their houses, villages were destroyed. So Azerbaijan had 2 issues and couldn't just forget. And the Armenian side, thinking that if time passes, everything will be fine, was delusion. And eventually we ended up having a second war.
I mean, historically, I think in terms of justice, that is a just fight, Karabakh becoming or part of Armenia. But in terms of reality, I think the foreign powers have a big role to play. I mean, during the war, Turkey intervened, Pakistan intervened, nobody said anything, and Armenia was weak in terms of military or disorganized, whatever. But I think there's a lot of dishonesty going on. I think the Armenian leaders covered the issue up and didn't say openly, this is our problem, what are we going to do, because the international community, I was even in the papers in the West, they said, oh, Azerbaijan, this is part of Azerbaijan, what are they talking about, what are the Armenians talking about? I know there is a group of organizations or institutions like Minsk, they supported the Karabakh issue and it took years and years to discuss it, they got nowhere. But I think, this is my personal opinion, I may be wrong, but I have a feeling that there was a lot of deceit and covering the reality. That's what I think.
Ես հայերենով պետք է արտահայտվեմ, արդեն կարծում լրիվ հասկանում եք։ Նախ ուզում եմ շնորհավորել թե հեղինակներին, թե թարգմանիչին, գրքի հրատարակության համար շատ կարևոր աշխատություն է, հատկապես գիտական հրատարակություն։ Ես իմ հարցումները, քանի որ գրքի մանրամասնություններին ծանոթ չեմ, ես 2 հարց ունեմ, որովհետև կռվին ես հետևել եմ առաջին ուրվանից, որքան որ հնարավոր է եղել ինձ համար։ Ես նույնիսկ զոհվածների ցանկ եմ պատրաստել։ Այդ իշխող Հայաստանի իշխանությունները չեն հրապարակում, ես 1350 անուն եմ հավաքած զոհվածների մասին։ Այ բնական կարգու դասավորված, եթե ցանկանաք կտրամադրեմ ձեզ։ Իսկ հարցս վերաբերում է
He's followed the war in detail. He has personal records in the mass, the names of 1,300 men killed in the fighting, and he has 2 questions about that.
Առաջին հարցը Անգլիայի դերակատարությունը։ Պատերազմը սկսելուց հետո Մինսկի խումբը ՄԱԿ-ի ապահովության խորհրդին է ներկայացնում ինչ-որ առաջարկ, այդ առաջարկը խանգարվում է ինչ-որ պատճառով եւ ես չկարողացա պարզել պատճառները։ Մինսկի խումբը, քանի որ Ֆրանսիան է, Ռուսաստանը եւ Ամերիկան, ուրեմն ենթադրվում է, որ դրանց կողմից չի խանգարվել։ Մնում է Անգլիան եւ Չինաստանը։ Անգլիայի դեսպանը Հայաստանի մեջ հաստատեց, որ իրենք չեն։ Ուրեմն այնտեղ մնաց Չինաստան։ Եթե ընդունենք Անգլիայի պատասխանը անկեղծ, Անգլիայի բացառությունը անկեղծ։ Դեռ հարցականը մնում է ինչ եղավ այդ հարցը, ինչու այդպես խանգարվեց, ով խանգարեց եւ հնարավոր չեղավ առաջ։
So raising the question of British involvement in this process, that when Minsk group came up with a solution, I guess the problem, it was scuttled at the United Nations, and if it wasn't the British, I think he's referring to the UN Security Council at 5. Whether China had
the 5 security members.
Whether it's China, what the role of China was, so who undermined the process for peace during the fighting. Do you have any information?
I don't think the UK had important role, neither China. And basically, Minsk group was a very light structure, and of course there was, diplomat from Russia, another from France, and a third from the US who had this task. But I mean, Minsk group, I think, was important and could do something, could represent something when Russian-US relations were good and they wanted to collaborate to find solutions. By 2020, those relations were very, very bad and they couldn't act together anymore. So Minsk group formally existed, but it had no impact compared to the impact it had in the late 1990s, for example, when they were really very much determined to work together to find a solution. And so during the war, and still, at 3 occasions, there were ceasefires declared. The first one negotiated in Moscow by Russian mediation. The second one mediated by France, and the third one mediated by the American President Trump during his first term. And all 3 were not respected by Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan army was advancing and they were not interested in stopping. Eventually, the 44-day war stopped when Russia decided to use military means to stop it. So yeah, I mean, diplomacy can work if parties want to negotiate. If they don't want to negotiate, I think for many, many years they were just pretending that they were negotiating. They were just exchanging messages, but there was no serious efforts to say, okay, let me understand what the other side wants and whether I can really take steps towards peace. Because any peace deal needs concessions, and this can be very costly politically back home.
Actually, I think that's a good place to stop.
We're quite hard to with that route.
Should we entertain one more question? Well, we can do it right. That's a good place to stop. It's about compromising for peace as well. Something that I think we can learn from, even from this point onwards. The question is when compromise becomes the regular. I think that's the stage we're in today. So there's a lot more to do. I hope your academic work continues and you continue generating these kinds of questions, probing questions that filter into Armenian civil society, that informs them to make better democratic choices. We can have elections there now. You wonder how all this works into there, but only in the democratic context we hope that these elements will filter into the state system and will come with better solutions to the problems that lie ahead today. And there's a role for you to play as academics to share this type of knowledge with the rest of us. Thank you for coming here today, and I wish you luck with your work, and I wish luck to our members in the higher stand as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
You don't want to cover the books, please do so.
Copies of Defeat.
So I got two.
The other ones are for them is showing some of the publications that we have. Շնորհակալ եմ ցերնարչան համար, ուսամ արիքը գտա անցավ հանդիպի Երևանի մեջ եւ հաջորդ բուն անցել։ Ուսամ արիքը գտա անցավ հանդիպի եւ ասպիսի կողմերին շնորհակալ Հայաստանի մեջ բնավ սպիրտի մեջ շնորհակալ եմ ձեր մասնակցությանը։ Okay, thank you. We can mingle and we can take a look at the books.